I never planned to tell this story. I told myself some things were better left quiet, buried under dignity and patience. But silence stopped being protection the moment humiliation spoke louder than respect. If you're listening right now, it's because that moment forced my voice out of hiding. It happened at a family gathering my auntie helped pay for, not hosted by her, funded by her, the kind of gathering where everyone smiles too much and gratitude is assumed instead of expressed. We were seated in a bright room filled with clinking glasses and rehearsed laughter when someone leaned back, laughed, and said it. "She's lucky we're around. Honestly, she wouldn't manage without us." The words landed casually, confidently, like they were stating a fact everyone already agreed on. No hesitation, no awareness, as if my auntie wasn't even a person in the room, just a topic, a responsibility, a weight. They continued, piling it on, calling themselves her saviors, talking about all the things they had supposedly done for her, sacrifices they never made, support that existed only in their version of events. Their voices grew louder with each claim, feeding off the attention, the nods, the uncomfortable chuckles from people who didn't know the truth well enough to challenge it. I remember the room clearly, the polished table, the soft lighting, the laughter that followed their jokes, and then the shift when eyes slowly turned toward my auntie. Not with admiration, not with appreciation, with pity. That was the part that broke something inside me. She didn't react, she didn't correct them, she didn't flinch. She sat there perfectly still, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Calm on the surface, controlled, swallowing the insult whole like she had practiced for years. She looked composed, but I knew that kind of stillness. It's the stillness of someone absorbing pain quietly so others don't have to feel uncomfortable. And I did nothing. I sat there, smiling when expected, nodding when required, letting their story stand unchallenged, letting them rewrite her life in front of her. I felt shame crawl up my spine, heavy and hot, because part of me knew I was participating just by staying silent. That was the first crack. I realized humiliation doesn't always arrive screaming. Sometimes it wears confidence. Sometimes it's delivered with laughter, wrapped in polished words and social permission. Sometimes it's disguised as concern. As I watched them speak over her, for her, about her, something else settled in my chest. Quiet, dangerous certainty. They believed she depended on them. They truly believed she needed them to survive, to function, to exist with dignity. They were wrong. They didn't know it yet, but that belief was about to cost them everything. That night, sitting there beside her while they took credit for her strength, I understood something with painful clarity. This wasn't just disrespect. This wasn't just misunderstanding. It was a miscalculation. And that moment, right there, under the sound of forced laughter and borrowed pride, was when everything changed. I need to rewind because none of what happened makes sense without understanding where she came from in my life. When stability disappeared from my childhood, she didn't announce herself as a hero. She just showed up, quietly, consistently. She became my anchor without ever asking to be called one. What? I remember nights when the house felt too big and too empty at the same time. She was always awake, always working, always carrying responsibility like it was second nature. While other people rested, she stayed late at jobs that drained her, came home exhausted, and still made sure everything was handled. She chose responsibility over ease every single time, giving up comfort so others wouldn't have to feel the lack. What hurts the most is knowing the same people who humiliated her years later were once the ones leaning on her the hardest. They called her constantly, needed favors, needed money, needed time, needed solutions. And she gave, not once or twice, but relentlessly, because saying no felt cruel to her back then. Somewhere along the way, she got labeled the reliable one. At first, it sounded like praise. Then it became a role she couldn't step out of without punishment. Reliability turned into expectation turned into obligation, and obligation erased gratitude completely. The pattern was always the same. She gave, they took, and when she gave again, they took more. Appreciation faded, replaced by entitlement. Her generosity stopped being seen as kindness and started being treated like a guarantee. There was one betrayal that still tightens my chest when I think about it. She stepped in financially when someone cornered her with urgency and tears. Promises were made, gratitude was sworn, and once the help was secured, those promises dissolved into manipulation. She wasn't thanked, she was pressured, reminded, controlled. Her help became leverage against her. That was when she learned silence. She told herself staying quiet kept the peace. That endurance was safety, that if she absorbed the discomfort, everyone else would stay calm. What she didn't realize then was that silence wasn't protecting her. It was training them. Little by little, her identity was rewritten by people who benefited from her restraint. Her strength was minimized, her independence ignored, her story adjusted to suit their convenience. She became the version of herself they needed her to be. Dependable, compliant, invisible. And I watched all of it happen. I grew up believing her silence was strength. I admired how she never reacted, never complained, never demanded. I didn't understand the cost of that silence. I didn't see how much of herself she was slowly giving up just to keep others comfortable. Now I know better. Because history doesn't disappear. It doesn't fade just because time passes. It waits, quietly, patiently, and eventually it demands to be acknowledged. After that night, they didn't back off. They advanced. What started as humiliation evolved into control, dressed up as concern. Every demand came wrapped in a soft voice and a public smile. "We're just worried about you. We only want what's best." Concern became their favorite disguise. They began speaking for her before she could even open her mouth. If someone asked her a question, they answered it first. If she hesitated, they filled the silence with assumptions. They explained her needs, her limits, her life, as if she were incapable of representing herself. I watched them interrupt her mid-sentence, finishing thoughts she never expressed. Behind closed doors, the tone changed completely. I heard it in hushed conversations and careless laughs. They mocked her independence, calling it cute and temporary. They joked about how she would eventually need them again, how she always did. Their confidence wasn't subtle, it was rehearsed. They kept reminding her of everything they'd done for her. Every favor was itemized. Every moment of help was recycled as proof of ownership. "After all we've done," they'd say, like it was a debt she could never finish paying. Their voices were calm, but the message was sharp. Obedience was expected. The pressure campaign intensified. Guilt was applied privately. Obligation was reinforced publicly. Image became a weapon. They praised her compliance in front of others and questioned her choices in private. They framed resistance as ingratitude. They made sure she knew that stepping out of line would come with consequences. That's when I started noticing the cracks. Their stories didn't match anymore. Dates shifted, details changed. Their confidence relied on repetition, not truth. The more they talked, the more inconsistencies surfaced. They weren't coordinating, they were improvising. Then came the moment that changed the air between us all. She didn't respond immediately to a request. No apology, no explanation, just silence. I saw it, the flicker, just for a second. Fear flashed behind their confidence before they masked it with irritation. They weren't used to waiting. They weren't used to uncertainty. Something they depended on wasn't responding the way it used to. They pressed harder after that, but the tone shifted. Their voices tightened, their smiles thinned. They checked their words more carefully, like they were suddenly aware of risk. Whatever they thought they controlled was no longer guaranteed. Every interaction after that felt charged. Conversations lingered too long. Pauses stretched uncomfortably. It was like a countdown ticking under the surface, loud enough to feel but quiet enough to ignore. They didn't know it yet, but exposure was no longer a possibility. It was inevitable. The phone rang late that night, long after the noise of the day had settled. I remember staring at the screen before answering, already sensing that whatever waited on the other end would change everything. When I picked up, her voice was calm, not shaken, not rushed, calm in a way I had never heard before. "I need you to listen," she said. No apology, no hesitation, just certainty. That was when she told me the truth. For years, quietly, deliberately, she had secured everything: her finances, her assets, her legal boundaries, accounts separated, documents signed, protections in place. She had done it slowly, without announcements, without drama, without tipping off anyone who believed they had leverage over her. She hadn't prepared out of fear, she had prepared out of clarity. She explained how she saw the pattern long before anyone else did, how she recognized that kindness without boundaries becomes a liability. So she built walls that looked like patience from the outside. She let them believe the version of her that kept them comfortable, all while removing every thread they thought they could pull. As she spoke, I heard the shift in her voice. The fear that used to live there was gone. In its place was precision, control, a steadiness that didn't ask for permission. Every word landed exactly where she intended it to. "I'm done being spoken for," she said. "I'm done being explained away. They don't get to tell my story anymore." That was the moment it hit me. They never protected her. They never saved her. They never held her up. She protected herself. Oh. All those years they called her dependent. She was quietly independent. While they built confidence on assumptions, she built security on facts. Their power was imagined. Hers was documented. And something shifted inside me too. I realized I wasn't just a witness anymore. Silence wasn't loyalty, it was distance. From that moment on, I chose alignment. I chose to stand where truth stood. Whatever came next, I wouldn't be watching from the sidelines again. That call taught me something I'll never forget. Real power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't brag. It doesn't demand credit. It waits until the moment it's needed, and then it speaks once. Everything they displayed in public, the confidence, the authority, the control, was built on a lie that depended on her staying quiet forever. She wasn't quiet anymore. And once I understood that, I knew there was no avoiding what came next. The confrontation was inevitable. The confrontation didn't happen by accident. It was deliberate, public, impossible to avoid, a space where no one could interrupt, deflect, or rewrite what unfolded. People were present who mattered, people who had heard their version of the story for years, the kind of setting where truth has witnesses. She arrived calm, grounded, not early, not late, exactly on time. She let them speak first. They didn't hesitate. Confidence poured out of them like muscle memory. They spoke loudly, comfortably, repeating the same narratives they always had, how much they'd helped her, how concerned they were, how dependent she'd been. Their arrogance filled the room because they believed it was still safe to be careless. She didn't interrupt, she didn't react, she just listened. And then, precisely when their certainty peaked, she spoke. Her voice was even, measured, unemotional. "That's not accurate," she said. The room shifted. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She stated facts, dates, amounts, decisions. She laid out the truth cleanly, one piece at a time, like evidence placed carefully on a table. Every sentence removed another illusion they were standing on. I watched their faces change. First confusion, then calculation, then the moment it hit them, sharp and unmistakable. They had no leverage, none. What they thought was control evaporated in seconds. She enforced her boundaries without drama. Contracts were referenced, documents produced, legal separations clarified. Everything they assumed she relied on them for had been secured long ago. The illusion of dependence ended right there, under fluorescent lights and too many watching eyes. Their narrative collapsed in real time. They tried to speak over her, but there was nothing left to say. The story they told for years didn't survive contact with facts. Witnesses exchanged looks, whispers stopped, pity drained from the room, replaced by something heavier: respect. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She didn't beg for understanding. She let the truth do the damage they'd earned. Every attempt they made to regain control only exposed how little they had left. Then came the silence. No shouting, no outbursts, just a thick, crushing quiet that pressed against everyone present. The kind of silence that follows collapse. It was heavier than anger, louder than accusation. She stood up calmly, thanked everyone for listening, and walked away without looking back. Justice didn't arrive with cruelty. It arrived with clarity. The days after felt different in a way I can't fully explain unless you've lived through a shift like that. The power dynamic didn't wobble or negotiate, it changed permanently. Conversations adjusted, tones softened. People who once spoke over her now chose their words carefully, if they spoke at all. They tried to rewrite the story. I saw it happen in real time. Subtle edits, softer language, attempts to reframe the past. But it didn't work. No one was listening anymore. Once the truth had witnesses, the performance lost its audience. My auntie moved differently after that. Her steps were lighter, her shoulders relaxed. She didn't scan rooms for threats or brace herself before speaking. She existed without anticipation of harm, and that alone felt revolutionary. Fear no longer dictated her posture. Boundaries reshaped everything instantly. Some relationships thinned, others disappeared. A few adjusted and survived. There were no arguments about it. Boundaries don't negotiate, they define. People either respect them or remove themselves. I carry my own guilt through all of this. I didn't see her strength when it was quiet. I mistook endurance for consent. I stayed silent when I should have stood beside her. That weight stays with me, even now. There were moments after, small, unremarkable moments, that meant the most. Sitting in silence without tension, watching her rest without vigilance, seeing her enjoy stillness instead of guarding it. Peace didn't announce itself. It settled in gently. I learned something important then. Consequences don't require revenge. They require clarity. Once clarity arrives, everything else rearranges itself naturally. Peace didn't come through forgiveness. It came through truth, through refusing to carry lies any longer, through standing in reality without apology. Respect returned the moment dependency was disproven. The moment the illusion shattered, dignity stepped back into its place. And in the quiet that followed, there was calm, not borrowed, not temporary, but earned. If you're listening to this, I'm speaking directly to you, to anyone who's ever been underestimated by the people closest to them, to anyone who's been quietly reduced, spoken over, or treated like they couldn't stand on their own without permission. Totes, silence is often mistaken for need. When you don't defend yourself, when you don't correct every lie, people assume it's because you can't. They confuse restraint with weakness. They mistake patience for dependence. And once they believe that, they start building stories where you only exist because they allow it. That's the danger of letting others define your strength. The longer you let them narrate your life, the more comfortable they become rewriting it. They start believing their version over your reality. And eventually, they act on it. What I learned through all of this is simple but unforgiving. Preparation is power. Real power doesn't show off. It doesn't argue. It prepares quietly and waits. When the moment comes, it doesn't need volume. It needs facts. Watching my auntie reclaim herself taught me what dignity actually looks like. It's not loud. It doesn't beg to be seen. It draws boundaries without explaining them and enforces them without guilt. Dignity isn't about pleasing others. It's about refusing to shrink for their comfort. Let me be clear about something. Needing no one is not the goal. Independence isn't isolation. The goal is being unexploitable. The goal is choosing support instead of being trapped by it. There's a difference, and it matters. I want you to question the narratives around you. Ask yourself who benefits from the story being told about you. Ask who gains comfort, control, or validation from your silence. Because silence is never neutral. It always serves someone. And remember this above all else. My auntie never needed them. They needed the illusion that she did. They needed to believe they mattered more than they did. When that illusion collapsed, so did their power. If this story resonated with you, if it made something click, take a moment to like and subscribe. Carry this with you. And the next time your respect is tested, remember, clarity is stronger than noise, and truth always waits for its moment.